Let's go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zephyr's Adjusted for Risk podcast from the shores of Lake Tahoe. Over the past 2 years, I have had the honor and privilege of talking with some of the brightest and most influential people in the investment and wealth management space. One of my favorite parts about these discussions has been learning more about the person that is behind the thought leadership, the expertise, and the products, and finally their stories. For some of these guests, what they did prior to joining the wealth or investment management space had a greater impact than the impact they're currently having on the investment and wealth management space. So, in honor of Veterans Day and giving thanks to all those brave individuals who served in the armed forces to give us freedom and the liberties that we all enjoy every day, we are holding a very special Veterans Day edition of Zephyr's Adjusted for Risk podcast. I have three amazing guests on to talk about their experiences in the military and their transition into the investment or wealth management space. So enough from me. I've talked enough. It's time to turn to these three very brave individuals who have contributed to our freedom as well as the investment and wealth management space. But first, today's episode is sponsored by the award-winning Zephyr, which helps investment professionals make more informed investment decisions on behalf of their clients. With that, I'd like to welcome and give a huge thanks to Julie Kane. Julie is the CEO and managing partner at Democracy Funds. Jim Jackson. Jim is the Co-Chief Investment Officer and Senior Portfolio Manager at Victory Income Investors, a Victory Capital investment franchise. And Paul Sarama. Paul is the Managing Director and Wealth Manager at Baker Sarama Wealth Management Group at Steward Partners. Jim, Julie, and Paul, it's a true honor to have you on. And most importantly, thank you so much for your service. For Julie and Jim, welcome back. Glad I didn't scare you away the first time. And Paul, welcome. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your firms that you currently work for? Let's start with you, Paul.
Sure. I work at Steward Partners, which is a hybrid registered investment advisor. We clear through Raymond James and Pershing. My team is a team of three individuals, financial advisors with two support staff. We manage assets for individuals, and we certainly focus on the planning side. Our team is a discretionary portfolio management team. So once we work with our clients on a planning side, we come up with a plan, and then we implement that plan and acting in a fiduciary capacity.
Fantastic. Julie, can you tell us a little bit more about Democracy Funds?
Sure. Thanks for having us again, Ryan. I'm Julie Kane, the CEO of Democracy Investments. We are an RIA with one product listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It's called the Democracy International Fund, ticker DMCY. And for all the veterans listening right now, in a nutshell, our strategy is a form of economic warfare that supports democracy internationally.
Fantastic. And Jim?
Yeah, thanks again, Ryan, for having me back on. So I'm the co-CIO of Victory Income Investors. We are an active fixed income manager, managing about 30 billion of active mutual funds, ETFs, and institutional accounts across money market products, tax-exempt products, and taxable bond products.
Fantastic. Thank you guys again. Julie, so can you just start by telling us, about your time in the military, like what branch, rank, and any other information you'd like to share about your time there? We'll start with you, Julie, and go around the horn. And I apologize, military, my dad wasn't in the military. I wasn't brave enough to be in the military. So a lot of terms that you may say, might be new to me, or so on. So please, Julie, you have the floor.
So I started in ROTC at UVA. That was my path into the Navy. And once I was in ROTC, I decided I wanted to be a pilot, and I was able to go to flight school during Desert Storm. And fast forward, I was stationed in the Philippines, where I got to fly the Navy SEALs around, do combat search and rescue exercises, training exercises. Also did torpedo recovery out of Coronado, and had a really exciting, high adrenaline early career in the Navy, and which I'm very much grateful for.
Very cool. Paul.
Sure. I joined and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps when I was 18 years old. And that was in 1997. And when I enlisted, they ASVAB test you, and then they assign you into roles. And I happened to be selected to be, at that time, a crew chief in aviation for a helicopter unit. And as I was going through flight training, I got pulled into the fixed wing side and was selected to move over to KC-130s, which was a very small unit in the Marine Corps. So I acted as a airborne radio operator, loadmaster for the KC-130 FNR. So initially I was stationed in Okinawa, spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. In late 2000, I transferred to Miramar, and from Miramar, our area of operation was the Middle East. So obviously the time of that, when the towers were knocked down, I was part of the first group. We were stationed in Western Pakistan as Task Force 58. And then I was extended a year. So after my time in Afghanistan, I was what was called stop loss, which I was happy to be because my unit was very tight and those were my friends. I stayed and then went into the first opening act of the Iraq War in 2003 and got out after 6 years.
Well, that's awesome, Paul. Jim, and finish up with you.
Sure. So I was a active duty Marine, as Paul was. It's great to hear that, Paul. So
Number 5.
served from I served from 94 to 99, starting in Quantico at the basic school, as all Marine Corps officers do. Then Camp Lejeune and Marine Corps Air Station, Yuma, Arizona. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1994.
Fantastic. So, Jim, you go in, at some point you decide to go into the military. Can you tell us about that decision on, your decision process to enlist into the armed services? And then also your decision to get into the investment management space. Like, did you always want to get into the investment management space, or is there something did you meet somebody, a mentor? Can you tell us about that transition?
Sure. I'd say the decision to enter the Marine Corps was probably made when I was in high school, really influenced by my dad. Okay. My dad was a Marine in the early 1960s. He was very proud of his service. It was a big part of who he was. And that was a heavy influence on me. And I think when I was in high school, I was exploring, different sort of avenues to do that. And that really sort of drove my really singular focus on wanting to go to Navy, because that was the service academy that is the only one that had a path to going into the Marine Corps. So the idea for a service academy came from my 9th grade English teacher, who pulled me aside and said, "This is really something you should think about." And at that time, I had no idea anything like that actually was out there in the world. So now, as far as like the transition, I think I had really no idea that the investment world existed when I first went to Navy. I say my first introduction was kind of benign, where I was, after my plebe year at Navy, which is your first year, you do a summer cruise, and my summer cruise was on an aircraft carrier, and for 6 weeks or so, and we were at sea, and as a mid, you're just trying to find your way, right? And you're out at sea for a long time, and just trying to find things to do in my sort of spare time. And I was just reading everything that was there, and I picked up a money magazine. I said, "Well, this is kind of interesting. What does this mean?" And actually, the result is I went back to school, changed my major to economics, and then I took a class, which was supposed to be an accounting class, but the teacher basically split the class from an accounting class to half of that doing accounting, and then the other half was introing all of us to the worlds of stocks and bonds. And that sort of really opened my eyes. And that really is sort of what started the path that have been on now for 25 years.
I love that story, Jim. And now look at you're co-managing billions of dollars, and wasn't that long ago you were like, investment management, what's that? I love it. Julie, can you kind of share this story about how you transitioned, or your thought process going into ROTC, being a pilot, and then to where you are now, a CEO of a successful investment management firm?
That's right. Yeah, like Jim, I became interested in high school. I went to an all-girls high school near DC, and I couldn't find anyone to help me apply to the Naval Academy, and I had raced with them during the summer. So when I got to UVA, I went over to the RTC unit and joined there, and was able to continue to race with the Naval Academy. A lot of good friends there. Go Navy.
Go
I
Navy.
hear they're undefeated, by the way.
They are.
And also my mom's dad was a P-38 pilot in World War II, West Point grad. So that was Army Air Corps. He retired as a colonel in the Air Force, but sadly passed when I was 2. But I think that draw to flying was in my blood. And then my dad did ROTC at Cornell. He's actually an immigrant from Germany, barely got out when he was 5 years old at the start of World War II. And he wanted to give back to his country, and did that by joining the Navy through Cornell ROTC. So I have military heritage on both sides of my family, but I was not, encouraged to go that path. I chose it, and have no regrets. Like I said, once I was in, it was just incredibly exciting. And then my last squadron, they had too many pilots after Desert Storm, and they were actually paying pilots to get out early. And so there was a window of getting an honorable discharge. So I think it'd been just over 4 years when I decided to go. I felt like I was flying to desk. The weather wasn't, the weather was the same every day. The mission was kind of the same. And I had started with such exciting missions. It was hard to do something more day to day. And I thought, well, maybe the business world would be more exciting than this. So I went to one of those organizations that connects junior military officers with various industries. So speed dating format. I was going table to table, pharmaceuticals. Yeah, no, I was still very mission driven. And then I met with a company called SEI, and they were just starting to explore recruiting veterans. And the CEO had a theory that we would be cheaper and harder working than MBAs. And fast forward, I was in their first class of junior military officers. SEI is a huge company at the time. They're doing mutual funds, trust accounting, et cetera. I was able to work directly for the CEO. Okay. And fast forward, I found that mission driven that I was craving in finance. Finance makes the world go around. There's nothing that you can't influence with money. And so really happy with my decision, and really grateful to SEI for helping with that transition. And I went from there to business school, and that opened my eyes to all kinds of opportunities. And I've been in finance pretty much my whole career now since then.
Fantastic. Julie, do you still have a active pilot's license?
I got my private pilot's license when I was getting out in San Diego. And then it was boring. I was like, well, I can instruct to stay current, but it's just not the exciting flying that I remember. I mean, with fixed wing, doing Cessna, it was exciting. 30 minutes. Then I was like, I switched to biking. That's how I get my adrenaline fix now.
Awesome. Fantastic. And Paul, let's finish up with you on your decision to get into the military, and then where you're at now in the wealth management space.
Sure. So, my path when I got out, I was 24. I had just gotten out of, Iraq, and I left the Marine Corps and moved back home. And I was going back to school in the GI Bill, and it was an absolute terrible period of time, right? So I mean, it's not fun. You're moving back. You're taking a big step back in life. And I was going to school at a community college, and then I made it the first semester through, and I said, okay, I made it through. What's the path forward? Am I going to stay? It was not, an environment I wanted to be in. And I just kind of doubled down and said, look, here's where I am in life. The best path forward is finishing school. So I chose to basically try to get into, a 4-year school. I transferred over to Rutgers. And when I transferred into Rutgers, I looked at it as, what is the best possible outcome to get out of this? I kind of stacked ranked in an Excel spreadsheet what the highest earning jobs were post-graduation. And it was like business number one. That wasn't an option because I would have had to go to school a 5th year. I was too old. Accounting was number 2 in economics, right? I hated accounting classes and I enjoyed economics. So I said, let's go into economics, and I did. And I made it a full-time job. I was going to class as much as possible to graduate as quickly as possible. And I graduated Rutgers after a few years, and I got hired by UBS into one of their training programs. So I started at UBS in 2007, and that was my path into wealth management. And certainly from there, it's taken several turns, but that was my initial way into the wealth management field.
Awesome. So all three of you are very successful in your current careers. What what did your time in the armed services, military, prepare you for your current roles? You're in leadership. Was there something in the military that helped you prepare for leadership and where you're at today? Jim, let's start with you.
I would say absolutely. I think that the Marine Corps is one of the greatest leadership laboratories that exist on the planet. From the idea of pushing decision-making down to the lowest level where it needs to be made, the idea of empowering your Marines to accomplish the goals that you set out for them, and encouraging them, supporting them to do that. I think that it was really the single most formative experience of my life. And when I look back on it, so my first unit, I showed up and I have 35 Marines, and my first, didn't necessarily call him that, but he was in effect a platoon sergeant, was a 29-year master gunnery sergeant who had served in Vietnam. And I show up as a 23-year-old second lieutenant, and I don't know anything. And as he retired, and then there was a gunnery sergeant that had moved into that role, Gunnery Sergeant Taylor. I'm grateful to him. He put me in situations that forced me to lead, forced me to make decisions, forced me to be in front of my Marines, forced me to motivate them, forced me to sort of lead our unit, and provide the support and guidance to do that. And I think that the biggest lesson out of that is that you can walk into any situation. It doesn't necessarily matter what your title is, what the rank on your collar is. You rely on your people, you rely on their judgment, you rely on their guidance as much as anything. And that was such a valuable experience for me. I look back on it so fondly now, many, many years later.
Yeah, I love that, Jim, because a team, whether, in the business industry or just sports, like at Rutgers on Wisconsin, Jim, I think you're from Michigan. It's just so important to, trust your team too, right? Rely on your team, be able to trust them and lead them. And I love it. I've heard that many times from people that were in the military, the leadership roles that they've learned were invaluable. Julie, how about you? How has being in the military and being a pilot and going in some really interesting and adrenaline rushed situations led you to being a CEO and leadership?
Yeah, well, I would echo everything Jim just said. And yes, I mean, done some pretty scary, we're lucky to be alive, emergency landings. I mean, things have to get really bad for my pulse to go up. It's like, well, no one's about to die here. We'll get through this. And then I also really like the perspective of Team of Teams that McChrystal wrote about. And at a very young age, I orchestrated a joint exercise with the Marines, who played the bad guys. The SEALs were the good guys, and we had a down pilot in the jungle that had to be found by the SEALs before the Marines found them, and then extract with my squadron with 84 air cover. It was very exciting, and I was in operations at the time, so I coordinated the whole thing across. We were collaborating with who later became friends and other units to make it incredible, make sure it was a successful event. And doing that at a young age before computers, it was all paper and clipboard. Really dating myself. Whiteboards, remember the whiteboard?
Oh, yes.
But I think that early experience helped me later. I coordinated a merger integration of two companies, and just having that broader view of, complex missions are not about, just a handful of people. You've got to coordinate across multiple units in a wise way, and often with equipment that you're not sure it's going to work. The aircraft I was flying was older than me. To learn to make sure you have good friends in the maintenance department.
Yeah.
Like, they're really going to fly, and what should we be thinking about? And learn, and just staying calm and being creative, in the face of a challenge, I would say it's served me well.
Julie, you brought up a good point, and I'm sure this goes for the three of you. When you're in those life or death situations, it probably prepares you. And when people, it's no comparison, and I feel terrible for comparing this, but when markets are in a crisis, they're down 20%. I'm sure you guys have those calming nerves where it's like, you know what, everything's going to be okay. It may, based on your roles and your experiences in the military, 20% down in markets, yes, it's bad. There's a crisis, yes, but it probably gives you that calming effect through your experiences that we can get through this, and we will. And it's no time to panic or freak out. Stay the course. Paul, let's finish with you there in terms of what did you learn and prepare you for your current role.
Sure. Obviously, I agree with everything Jim and Julie said, and second that. And the statement you said, Ryan, it's really the fog of war. And in the Marine Corps, we would commonly talk about the fog of war, and you have a sense of planning. And in every mission you do in the Marine Corps, you plan, and then when the first bullets are fired, the saying goes, everything kind of goes away because the chaos, erupts. And when you live through that, you're absolutely right. You live through that and you realize it's about keeping a calm head, relying on the people, and using your judgment. And you get through those situations. And certainly in our jobs and certainly in finance, with the markets the way they are, the world the way it is today, it's about thinking your way through the problems. And my experience in the Marine Corps really dictates everything I do at my present spot in my present career. And it really has been a huge influence. And I look back on certainly those times when I was 20 years old, even in Afghanistan, in those situations where you were in a terrible situation, and in those situations, the camaraderie of your unit, the way everyone got together and got through it and really brought each other up was inspiring. And you look back at that and you realize if you get through those situations, you get through the markets, and it certainly stays with you.
Fantastic. That's great advice. Paul, you mentioned when you got out of the service, you leveraged the GI Bill. There's a lot of programs for veterans after they leave the service. Do you feel that enough veterans take advantage of those programs? And what can financial advisors do to help veterans as they leave the service?
It's a great question, Ryan. I wouldn't know the numbers on. I would assume that probably a lot of people don't go back and use the things like the GI Bill. I personally did, and it was obviously a great decision to do that. but young, especially the young, whether it's Marine, soldier, sailors, airmen, getting out should utilize the GI Bill. Certainly, I know it's improved significantly also in the last 20 years to provide opportunities. It's a great program.
Interesting. Jim, you were at, if I remember correctly, USAA, correct? First, or USAA was part of Victory. Do you, through your experience and your connection there, do you feel that veterans don't use the programs enough, or do you see that at USAA in your interactions?
Well, I think I'll go further back than that, right? So I started my career in the investment business, 2000, 2001, a company called Cigna Investment Management at that time. So it's sort of morphed into other things at this point. But, and then after I got out of the Marine Corps, I got my MBA from University of Michigan. The takeaway that I'm trying to sort of point out is that when I got my MBA, there were actually a handful of veterans in that class. Some of them I knew, most of them I didn't. I think that what you bring to the table is a level of experience in real world situations, working with people on a team, working with all kinds of different people from all over the US. And I think that those are really valuable to bring to any sort of employer, and that filling in sort of the functional skills is fairly straightforward, right? Either go to school or do something like that. But the other aspect of it is not repeatable, right? That is a distinct advantage that someone that has served brings to the table that their peers would not. And I would emphasize that someone getting out unsure what they want to do, explore various opportunities. There are plenty of programs, plenty of people that want to help, that are looking for those skill sets that you build serving, and that are willing to help people sort of get the sort of functional skills that they need to succeed in whatever path they want to take.
Yeah, Jim, there's only so much things you can learn from a textbook, right? In the military, you're not going to learn a lot of that stuff in a textbook. Julie, lastly, real quick, is there anything from your side, any tips you could give financial advisors, or not even financial advisors, people in the investment management space or investment professionals, to help veterans as they leave the service?
Yeah, well, I would put the veterans should reach out to veterans and anyone who they think could give them good advice. It's okay to pick up the phone or, do a cold email and say, hey, we have this in common. Could you take 10 minutes and answer a few questions for me? And very few people would say no to that. So I would say network hard, network through people you have in common with, because people can smell right away if you don't have any shared values about anything. Use your school network, and internships are a great way to get exposed to see if it's a fit. So before, trying something full time, and ask if you can do a 2-week internship to see if you like the culture.
Last question, Julie. I think that's a perfect segue, because my next question, last one, was what tips can you share other individuals who might either currently be in the military or recently removed and would like to get in the world of wealth or investment management? Julie, you kind of started there with internships. Can you comment a little bit more on that?
Internships and finding mentors. And, friends of friends of friends are the best. Can you please make a warm intro? I see you're connected on LinkedIn to this person who's doing something I'm interested in. Could you reach out on my behalf? LinkedIn is a great tool for that. And it's a great way to find fellow veterans that are maybe in industries you're interested in. Attend conferences. And we've talked about schools. Going back to school is a great way to take your time and really figure out your path. And then find other successful veterans who've had a successful transition and ask them for advice, because it's not easy. I mean, I don't know anyone that's had said it's, oh yeah, it was easy in the first year, no problem. It's hard for everyone to make that adjustment, to go from being in a uniform every day to suddenly it's a whole new lingo. And I remember people were giving me grief because I kept using the word gear. What's wrong with the word gear? And transition's hard. And then fast forward, I started to kind of feel like, where's the camaraderie that I had before? I'm not feeling that in the corporate world. So another tip I would say is you can find your people outside of work as well. I'm very active with a nonprofit that serves veterans in the Bay Area, and that's been involved with them for 8 years now. And I've really enjoyed that board work, and that kind of gave me some of the camaraderie I was missing from the days of active duty.
Awesome, Julie. That's fantastic. Paul.
Yeah. So I agree. Just reaching out to veterans is a great resource, and reaching out certainly through LinkedIn. I think people leaving should be looking at the wealth management field. The wealth management is a very aging demographic, and there just aren't that many younger people that are really in the business. So it is top heavy, and it's a really interesting transition time, certainly with all the, certainly improvements in artificial intelligence, and we're going to see a lot of changes over the next few years. This would be the time when you want to have people from certainly the military background entering into the wealth management field and really, bringing their knowledge base with them. It'll be a great time to be entering this field.
Paul, that's a great point. Great point about aging demographics there. And Jim, let's finish up with you on that. Any tips?
I would only add one. I think Julie and Paul had great answers. The only thing I would add is when you do find yourself in that first role, even if it's not the perfect role that you want, excel in it, because that will set the stage for everything else. Every move I've made in my career, every advancement has been based on the reputation you build from your first job, and you just build on top of it. So I think that once you get the opportunity, even if it's not perfect, not exactly what you want, you're going to be building off it. It's just a first step. So excel in that role, no matter what it is.
That's great advice, Jim. I know I don't have a very good academic background. I didn't, should I say, assert myself very well in academia. So I really relied on my first job, the connections. I was way behind the 8 ball when I got into the investment management industry because, I was too busy doing other things during college. And so I had to pay the price. And it's important then, you make your connections, you learn. And I had to learn it that way. Thank you so much, Julie, Jim, and Paul, for most importantly, your service in helping protect our great nation and the great things you are doing for this industry. And finally, being part of this special episode. I'd like to also thank all the other individuals who are currently serving or are serving in the armed forces. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Zephyr's Adjusted for Risk podcast. You can learn more about Zephyr and the great offers we have for veterans at the Zephyr LinkedIn page and zephyrfinancialsolutions.com website. And lastly, you can watch all of our other podcasts, such as Julie's podcast and Jim's podcast on the Zephyr YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify and iHeartRadio. Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.